how do we as leaders do everything we can to make the street medicine teams that we're working within, the healthcare systems that we're working within, and the community in which we live a better place that promotes mental and psychological well-being, especially considering the variety of responses and experiences that we are all going through right now during the pandemic. Welcome. If you're just joining, I apologize. I forgot to admit you from the waiting room, but I was just introducing our speaker, Matt Bennett, who in addition to being an all-around cool guy, I also needed to say that he's very handsome and intelligent.
Thank you, Liz. The check is in the mail.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Matt is going to spend a little bit of time talking about this, and then we're going to have some time for discussion afterwards. And I really do want it to be kind of a back and forth discussion, less of like a question and answer, but surely if you have a question that you want to clarify or something like that, just save it until the end and we'll incorporate it all at that time. So welcome to everybody and thanks for joining. And I'm going to admit one more person from the waiting room. I'm starting to think that I shouldn't have done this waiting room thing. Okay, Matt, I am handing it over to you.
Great. Let me get my screen shared with you all. There we go. So Liz, thank you so much. And it's great to see Zoom packed with street medicine heroes around the country and around the world. So, and I'll keep admitting people in the waiting room. So I'm going to multitask. So if you see my focus shift there. So Liz used to be a friend of mine until she asked me to condense 25 years of research into 20 minutes. So if you ever hear me speak, you know I do not shut up. And so I'm going to just get rolling. She gave a great introduction of me. Again, Matt Bennett, Denver, Colorado. Been working in the housing, healthcare for the homeless arenas for a couple decades now. Really, my whole life changed. I started out as a therapist. And saw the adverse childhood experience study, started to really learn about trauma's impact on brains, behavior, medical health. And all of a sudden, the things I never learned in graduate school to become a therapist, all of a sudden started to make a lot more sense to me. So ever since I heard about that, I was running a housing program for youth at the time. Back in around 2003, I've not stopped researching about trauma, reading about trauma. I started a blog. It seems like I've been doing that since the 70s now. Also, if you are interested and just need a little bit of escape, I've got a Trauma Informed Lens podcast that you can find pretty much anywhere, including my website. So if, you know, this hour's not enough, there's literally like 130 hours of me with the podcast as well. And if you need a good escape right now, nothing like a book subtitled A Trauma-Informed Neurobiological Approach to Motivational Interviewing as an escape from the pandemic that we're currently in. So before I start to share a little bit of my research with you, I just want to state that leadership is a journey. I started out as a therapist, and I always really loved group therapy a lot more than individual therapy. I enjoyed individual therapy, but I just like the group piece. And then somebody made this mistake of promoting me to a leadership position about 6 months into my career. And I had no skill set to do it. I was like a lot of people, they put me in charge of people, didn't give me 1 minute of training on how to do it. But I fell in love with it. I just kind of saw it as the next step for me from group therapy is how do I create systems? How do I, as a trauma-informed leader, really ensure that the folks that my patients, my clients, my students who I've worked with throughout my career, how do I put the best staff possible for them to work with? And that's been an obsession of mine. So much so, instead of reading some books on leadership, I went and got an MBA in healthcare administration. And ever since, I've been really trying to figure out how do we lead organizations who deal with trauma every day? How do I keep staff healthy who are exposed to people's trauma, addiction, intimate partner violence, abuse that they've experienced in childhoods and into the adulthoods, the stigma of HIV, racism, just the stigma of homelessness. How do I keep people healthy so that they can give them best self? So while this has been a 25-year-old journey, and I'm serious about that, I started taking my first business class before I graduated as a therapist. I want to share some of the foundational pieces. Liz will also post the rest of this presentation that I just won't have time to get to online, so you can see a little bit of my further thinking. But as Liz knows, I can talk for days on this subject and not tire at all. So one of the ways that I do want to kind of set the foundation for this is one of the things I realized, even getting an MBA in healthcare administration, nobody was really talking about the stress and trauma about the work. And so what I went to is I went to this, I think I snuck in the back door, a really great master's in business administration program. I had, the professors would fly in from around the country. Students would fly in from around the world for a couple weeks. Then we did this virtual training. But when I ask questions is, how do you keep a staff healthy when our patients attacked them the other day? I had a patient spit on somebody, throw a needle at somebody, call them interesting names that I didn't know what the heck they meant because we didn't have Urban Dictionary at the time. How do I keep my staff healthy? Because as from my therapy background, I had no idea if somebody tried to attack you, I really had no idea how to help that person not only recover from that physical or verbal assault, but then how to deliver great care right afterwards. Because I would ask people, hey, I know you just got attacked 15 minutes ago, but hey, we still got patients waiting to be seen. We still got students in the classroom. We still got people in the housing program for you to go to. So one of the ways that I've really looked, and this brings in a little bit of my thinking about trauma-informed care and self-care as well, is this cup analogy, because since Liz only gave me 20 minutes, I don't have the opportunity to go into the neurobiology, epigenetics, and everything else that I can nerd about out way longer than 20 minutes. So the cup analogy is very simple. And let's think about you as an individual first, and then we'll take this to the leadership level. Is the cup analogy has two parts. One is the size of the cup, or our capacity to hold stress. Now, if you're a nerd like me, this is our prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate the amygdala. So for the brain nerds out there, I'll throw a little teasers in there. So we know that if we're living a healthy life, if we're practicing good self-care, if we have a healthy lifestyle, healthy habits, if we have a good team culture, which is why the leadership team health is so important, we create a pretty high capacity to hold stress. If you are on this call and you've been in this career and doing street medicine for more than 15 minutes, I'm pretty convinced that you have a high capacity to hold stress. Now, what decreases the size of our cup? Things like just unhealthy lifestyle habits. We know work stress and burnout, as well as something I call empathetic intensity, which is the emotional impact of the work we do. You can't talk to a social scientist without comparing emotions to viruses. So now we know that we are also at high risk for things like vicarious trauma, secondary trauma. Again, I don't have a whole lot of time to go into the definitions around this, but we know there's some inherent, we can be wounded emotionally by being exposed to other people's trauma. Just to convince you that we need another level of leadership in healthcare in general, when we look at the most burned out people in our society. So let's say we're back at a time where we can pack a stadium full of 80,000 people, and all I knew about you was your job. And I wanted to bring the most mentally ill people onto the field to get them some help. And all I knew about was your work. Who would I call up to get treatment first? I'd call up physicians. Physicians are the most burned out profession that we have in our culture. Nurses, number 2, social workers, number 3. You can throw teachers and principals off there to round off the top 5. Something is seriously wrong with healthcare when our healers are greatly wounded by the work. So we've got to have a different model of leadership. How we're working in healthcare is not working by the level of burnout that we see. We've got to start to take this serious, because honestly, when I go get healthcare, I don't want my physician to be burned out because he might misdiagnose me. She might prescribe a treatment that is not prescribed. And so there's a real cost to this. So one of the things is we want to help people, and I'll give you quick strategies around this to expand that capacity. In other words, we want to put them in a mentally, physically, socially healthy, cognitively healthy place before they do this work. The other part of the cup analogy is the amount of stress in our cup at any given time. And so very simply, the amount of stress in our cup, I like to compare that, at least, and if you're a nerd about cortisol, you know that it's more complex than this, but roughly it's the amount of stress or cortisol we're carrying around in our body at any given time. So if we have room between the level of stress or the amount of cortisol in our body and our capacity, then we can operate out of that prefrontal cortex. Daniel Siegel, Pat Ogden, I love their work talking about this as the window of tolerance. In other words, when we have our stress regulated, we feel safe, which is so important when we go out on the street, because we want to be aware that there could be danger out there, but we want to feel safe, because when we feel safe, we can socially engage with people in a healthy way. We bring our best cognitive self, so we can, our IQ increases with our a moderate level of cortisol, decreases when our cup starts to fill up. Also, we can emotionally regulate as well. Now, when our cup starts to overflow, we, like the folks we work with, can go in that fight, flight, or freeze as well. Obviously, when we're in these states, when we're in fight or flight, we're in our amygdala. It actually, we know, can shut down our prefrontal cortex. So we're not bringing that cognitive self we need to provide the treatment we need to. Freeze response, dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, we're shut down. We don't have the energy to do the work. So again, if you want to think about a really easy way to think about stress, is we want to do long-term proactive self-care strategies to increase the size of our cup, increase our stress ability to manage stress, and then we want to do daily things to help manage the level at any given time. So we want to help our people from a leadership perspective to, again, implement those long and short-term strategies. All right, so to look at this, and this will probably, I'll spend a little bit more time on this, because this is when I've thought about this from a leadership model perspective. How do we look at trauma-informed leadership? How do we help structure an approach that allows us not only to keep people healthy, but to get the best outcomes possible? I hope that the staff is well. I hope that they are healthy. I hope their mental health, social health, emotional health are all great. But I also want them to produce the outcomes our patients need to thrive in life, to hopefully eventually get them off the street into housing and to start to make some of those turns. I know that relationship with you is often that starting point. So I'm breaking this down into a very simple equation. And there's two terms here that want to get us to that organization programmatic excellence is our goal here. The first is something I call effective leadership. And effective is another name for how we express our emotions. So I really believe, and I'll share a little bit of the research there, in such high stress environments where we're working with the top 3 social workers, nurses, physician categories for burnout, is that we have to focus on creating a well staff, a healthy staff. And leadership plays such a crucial role in that. It's not the only role. Personal self-care, other things are also obviously very important as well. Then, and again, you'll see these if you go look at the upper levels of my tree in this presentation, also some intellectual leadership things as well. And I look at this as, one is we want to establish the emotional and the cognitive, the relational capacity through the effective leadership pieces, creating that healthy staff. But then we want to give them the focus that they need to really achieve excellence. So I've just thrown the research in here to show that I've done my background and due diligence on this. And I was really trying to, what do we know about psychological health, mixing that with what we know brings out leadership results, because we want to hold both of those two things. So I just throw this up here to say this can't happen in our arena. We know, and this is done in the United States. If I got some international folks, you might be better than we are at leadership, but we are awful at leadership. This just shows that 75% believe their supervisor, or state their supervisor is the most stressful part of their job. About 25% would fire their boss, about that same much have stated they've been bullied by their boss. You can't be healthy if this is your scenario. Worst time of the day, time spent with your supervisor. And they tried on this one. I love this survey because they throw it in picking up dog poop. And people would rather pick up dog shit than spend time with their supervisor. That's how bad we are at leadership. It gets very serious when we start to look at these consequences. We know that people with bad bosses, and they've done a lot of these studies with nurses who work different shifts and have different nurse supervisors on that shift, they see incredible raises in cortisol. And long-term, people that state that they have a bad boss, actually we can see these huge jumps in serious heart problems, other medical conditions. The big thing for us, because I would imagine you would agree with me with this next statement, is to do street medicine successfully, you need everybody on your team at their best every day. So when we work for leaders who we don't think support us, when we don't see them as being a part of that team, we're not giving 100%. And there's some real costs with that for the folks that we're trying to help. Here is just my research done on the self-care. When we talk about vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, burnout, we see that there's real cost to this. One is there's cost to the individual's health. It's not just heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer, psychological health. We know vicarious secondary trauma are trauma, and we know a lot of people doing the work that you do each and every day can be diagnosed for post-traumatic stress disorder, with the only identifiable trauma being the work we do. Early onset Alzheimer's, dementia, that cognitive memory decline as well. And then we also know that our quality drops. Not only do we don't get as much satisfaction, we may not be the mom, dad, partner, spouse we want to be, but we also, our quality professionally drops as well. That's where I really worry about when you look at physicians, nurses, social workers being so burned out. You know, there's a cost to that to the individual, but we also know that the quality of care that they're delivering is not at the level that folks that you work with need each and every day. Because again, I can say this with all kinds of confidence when people ask me, you know, where do we see medical interventions? Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, all those places are great. If you want to see the best medicine in our country, go to street medicine, go to the Healthcare for the Homeless Clinic, because you help people gain health, treat medical conditions, chronic illnesses, HIV, all these things, and you're doing it a lot of times where these folks aren't permanently housed. That's medical intervention. So we have to be our best selves in order to be successful in this work. Just a few other things I want to throw your way here before I open it up to discussion is, one is, and this, if you need a take home, this is the take home. You are, as a leader, a role model for wellness. Your staff look to you about how to prioritize their own self-care. So we look to leadership. There's been plenty of studies done on this. We look to leaders for how to behave, how to prioritize self-care. I like to take the cup analogy and sort of flip your program or organization upside down. You put all your patients up on top. We know because of their trauma, we can actually see this in the research, we see smaller prefrontal cortex, larger amygdala. Translate this into the simple analogy, our folks have less capacity to manage stress before they get in that fight-flight response. Doesn't say anything bad about them as a person, it's just that brain actually always being hyper aware, looking for where the danger is going to come from, actually helps them survive on the street. So one of the things we do to provide medicine, to provide treatment, is we help emotionally regulate them. This is what I call empathetic intensity. So that next level on this cup pyramid, this inverse pyramid, is the cup of the frontline folks, because we know a lot of times to get to their cognitive brain, we've got to listen a little bit to the stress, listen to a little bit of the hardships they're going for. I got to see a first draft of Liz's book. And yes, Liz, I'm putting it out of the box because I know it's going to be great. You know, and it just still blows me away about some of the stories she tells. And if I were to say what makes Liz successful, yeah, she is a brilliant human being. She thinks about things in great ways. But what really makes her successful is the relationship she's able to establish with the patients she works with. Now, as we go further down this inverted pyramid, I want to make the argument that as leaders, one of our key jobs is to make sure that we know and we help monitor the health and wellness of our staff, of the folks going out each and every day. Now, sometimes I know we go out with those folks, but if you're in that supervisory position, one of the things I think we've missed in helping organizations, healthcare organizations, is really how do we support our staff to be healthy. A few things here: mindfulness, humility, honestly, discipline. Those are things I don't have time to talk about, but I would love to chat further for hours about this, because the one thing that I do want to end on here before I open it up to discussion is something that makes me a little bit unpopular in the healthcare arena, but I'm okay with that. And that's the idea of, I've really struggled with the question, especially with my work in the healthcare homeless arena. I do a lot of work with federally qualified health centers. How the heck are we going to change this epidemic of burnout in healthcare? How do we get physicians out of the number one spot? I want physicians out of the top 10, out of the top 20, because their work is so cognitively intense that I know if they're walking around with a full cup, they're not giving the cognitive energy we need. Same thing with nurses. We need to get our healers, our social workers out of that top 10. Again, I want physicians, nurses, social workers to live healthy, fulfilled lives. That's part of my motivation. But I also know we need that cognitive capacity to really give the treatment, especially when it comes to street medicine. So one of the things every staff needs that goes out onto the street, I think provides modern healthcare, but definitely with street medicine, what is your self-care plan? And as a supervisor, I want to support you in that. Now, for me, self-care plans have two parts. Well, one is a proactive part to the self-care plan. In other words, I want you to answer the question. I want to support you. What are you going to do each and every day to bring your best self to work? Now, a lot of that proactive stuff will be stuff they do in their personal life. And for me, we can't say, I take a bubble bath on a Wednesday. Not good enough. We need to say, what are you going to do each and every day? So thinking about things like diet, exercise, sleep, those are a lot of the foundations of wellness. Things like mindfulness practice, the use of support from the team, those sort of things will keep us healthy. The other point is a reactive plan. So I use a very simple stage, 4-stage for helping fatigue, as I call it. The first stage is exhaustion. So if you start to feel exhausted about your work, what are you going to implement to get your butt out of those stages of helping fatigue so you can bring your best self to work? So if your cup's getting full and staying full, what is the reactive strategy to get you back in that healthy state, back in that window of tolerance? Don't think about after you're burned out, how do you get out of burnout? It's in many ways too late. You want to have that proactive and reactive side of it. Also, the professional development. I use the word 20-mile march. It's a Jim Collins term, which is my favorite leadership author. And this is, what are you going to do each and every day to make yourself a better professional? This just might be spending 15 minutes listening to a podcast, listening to an audiobook. Maybe as a street medicine team, we're constantly reading books together. And I'm very clear. I don't want you to add an hour of professional development each day, but could you read a chapter a week as a team and talk about that? I see this as very important for two reasons. One is one is that if you're working to develop yourself as a professional, you become a better professional. The other thing is that if you're working to improve yourself and your street medicine team is working to improve itself, a hard day becomes about a larger journey. If I had more time with you, I'd talk about a shared vision. What do we want to accomplish? Who do we want to be 5 years from now? What expertise do we want to gain? The 20-mile march is the personal contribution to that larger vision. The other thing, and this is where I always end, I hate to end on this because, again, it kind of makes me unpopular in healthcare circles, is I really think because nurses, physicians, social workers, all part of the healthcare system are so burned out, we have to have, in the psychology arena, we call one of the best ways to help people stay healthy is through a process called co-regulation. In other words, one of the things that keeps us healthy is the people we surround ourselves with. One of the things I think is missing in healthcare, and I think could take us a long step towards getting physicians, nurses, social workers out of that top 5. I think schools is another example of where this is lacking, is strategic supervision. So not only do I want to help you with your self-care plan, but I also want to schedule a time every week or every 2 weeks to meet with you, check in with you, help you on your professional development. It's one of the things that's missing in most healthcare settings that I think could help us get these professionals out of that top 5, out of that top 10. So how do you, and this is the tricky question, because most of us don't have the time or resources. How do we meet with people strategically to help support them? One of the things I've seen in my work in homelessness and other arenas is that a lot of my folks need therapy from this. They've experienced that vicarious secondary trauma. Their cup is staying more filled. I am a role model, and I try to be this, and I live up to it, is I need therapy as someone who talks about, writes about, thinks about trauma constantly. I go to therapy every once in a while, if nothing else, for a checkup, because I want to make sure I'm not only the best professional I can be, also when I come home, I want to be the best husband I can be. I want to be the best father to my 2 children, which is a coonhound and a shepherd. So I'm not teaching them anything, but they still need my time. So, you know, I want to use that as a tool as well. So this work, we see the levels of PTSD in our profession, of vicarious secondary trauma and burnout off the charts. Therapy can be a really good way to do that. Even as a supervisor who's trained as a therapist, I don't do therapy for my staff, but I hope through my employee assistance programs and other things that I can be that bridge for folks. So I'm going to stop here. I just want to give you a preview of other things. Again, there's some, you'll see this on the handout, some really key concepts around the effective leadership things. What are some strategies we can do to really build those? Then the intellectual leadership, because we need to help people focus on what's important as leaders. Also accountability, shared expectations. And the final thing with this, that if you want to look at the presentation, I sort of give you a step-by-step way to think about integrating trauma-informed leadership. If you're interested in this, please reach out to me. I'll put my email out there. I don't want you to implement this with me just talking for 25 minutes. So obviously could need more than that, but yeah, Liz will tell you, and if you know me, I see some of the friends I know on this call, you know I love to talk about this stuff, and it's really hard to do what I'm going to do next. Give Liz back control of this, make her the host, and shut up here. So I'm excited for the conversation. So Liz, let me make you the host. I'm relinquishing power, and look forward to our conversation.
Hey, I gave up my power to you, so appreciate it. All right, I am going to see if I can unmute all of you. Yes, so I am planning on, in just a second, unmuting all of you so that you can all join in conversation together. However, if you have a noisy background and you would like to remute yourself, then please feel free to do that. Also, if you have a camera and are able to show us your beautiful face, we'd love to see you. And so I just want to kind of open this up. Thank you, Matt, for doing such an awesome job. You lived up to your expectations, which were, like I said, I set the bar high. Yeah, so thanks for sharing with us. And like I said, this doesn't have to be a question and answer thing, but I want to just use what Matt's given us to kind of stimulate some conversation about how do we think about doing this stuff on our street medicine teams, within our healthcare systems and within our communities, whether or not you see yourself as a leader, or whether or not you have a leadership position. I think all of us on this call are leaders. Right, so I hear some race cars in the background. So if you're doing NASCAR at the moment, you could mute yourself. So I unmuted all of you, and I invite you now to just, let's join in conversation.
I have something I could say if you have a moment.
Hi, Jay.
Matt, great presentation. It's been a long time. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, my
Um,
friend.
so one of the things I find that's really helpful, I'm a regional manager for several outreach teams out in Massachusetts, Western Mass mainly. And I find that the way we can build in reflective practice is a very important component for staff health. And so we do that in a variety of ways. I do certainly one-on-one supervision with folks. There's group peer supervision opportunities for people. And that happens on a regular basis. It's scheduled into their, people have a chance to really brief, number one. There's a lot of vicarious trauma and loss, like Matt said. You really need a place to talk about those kinds of issues, as well as kind of the approach, the overall approach we take to the healthcare that we provide and how we get person-centered with people. So we talk a lot about kind of our pre-treatment work toward getting person-centered and helping folks. The other part is that people are teamed up in the field, so they're checking in with each other while they're doing the outreach, and they have a chance to debrief like right after interacting with people. So they have, 2 or 3 basic questions they can ask themselves and each other in terms of, what just happened, what worked, what didn't work, what can we do better next time, what should we continue to do that's been, effective. And those are just very basic questions to get people really thinking about how they're staying centered. The last thing I just want to add is, just like we get person-centered with clients, it's all about getting person-centered with staff and using some of the same types of approaches with staff, understanding what drives them, understanding people's meaning, understanding what's valued, and understanding while we have a certain, perhaps, scaffolding that we use in terms of a model that we might be using to help others, we're also encouraging people to bring their individualized strengths to the picture and to the work. And I think that makes a difference in staff being excited about what they're doing as opposed to thinking they're just following other people's orders. I'll be quiet now, but that's my initial impression.
The wisdom of Jay. I love Jay. I love his work. I've read his books. I just feel it just blows me away. So yes, I'm so glad you gave those examples, my friend, because we've got to think about healthcare a little bit differently. And the one thing I think we've done a poor job of overall is that support. And again, when we look at the neuroscience and we see the importance of that co-regulation, giving that to our staff like we give it to our patients is such a critical, and I think best aspect of healthcare with it. So to find that time, and as Jay said, use it strategically. We want to maximize. You don't just want to sit with somebody for a half hour and chit chat, right? We want to make sure we're supporting. That's why I say have a self-care plan, have that 20-mile march plan, professional development plan. I use that time incredibly strategic, and I love what he says about the debriefing, group support as well. Check, A+ as always, my friend. Great points.
Hi, my name is Elliot Deal. I'm a certified recovery specialist in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you, Liz, for co-running the show so gracefully. One of the things that I just wanted to chime in with is I've only been doing this job for a couple of years. It doesn't truly connect with street medicine, although it kind of does, because I do offer certified recovery specialists to homeless, and I find that any time they touch, the different disciplines touch, it becomes clear that there's not that much of a division in the first place. One of the things that I wanted to share is we have a recovery plan that we work with our clients. It's the main piece of paperwork that drives the relationship. Of course, the rapport is the most critical component of what I do. However, this piece of paper is quite wonderful. And what I ended up doing right when I started is I had the intuition that in order for me to understand my job better, what I needed to do was fill out all the paperwork as if I was being a CRS to myself. And what you're saying makes so much sense, because part of the other than rapport, the most critical component of what I do is modeling recovery for my clients. And this mimics what you said about a supervisor modeling a supervisor for their clients. And I've tried getting some of my colleagues interested in this idea of it's not just putting myself in the shoes of my client, it's actually coming up with the plan for myself. What am I planning to do to recover for myself? And it's challenging, and it's fact-finding, and I found it to be beautiful. So I just wanted to share that.
Beautiful. I love it. I love that you feel it. I mean, so much wisdom there. So yes, for sure. Yeah. And that, again, that prioritize seeing ourselves as role models. And again, there's this concept called parallel processes, and it gets a little nerdy. It goes into mirror neurons. But if we're not healthy, how are we going to help other people healthy? And if our leadership level is dysfunctional, which I see a lot of dysfunctional leadership teams, we can expect the whole organization to follow suit. So we have to start to prioritize wellness if we're gonna fill that healing, helping role for other people. We've got to prioritize that because the current state is not showing we're doing a good job of that. Great insight.
Yeah, Elliot, I just want to say thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think it reminds me. So when I get horrible test taking anxiety. And when I was studying for all of the various large exams in medical school and whatnot, and I think even when I took the MCAT, the I don't know elsewhere in the world if you have to take an MCAT or what kind of exam you have to take to get into medical school, but anyway, those big exams, I had just through the roof anxiety, and it would prevent me from studying too. And so one of the things that I did each time before I was starting into the studying period for that is the first thing I would do is write down a list of things that make me happy and a list of things that I could do to get myself out of a funk when I knew inevitably I would start feeling that way because of all the studying and anxiety around the test. But what you said, Elliot, makes me wonder, how many of us on this call have a recovery plan or a wellness action plan for this pandemic? I mean, I know I don't. I could probably come up with something, but it makes me think that, we should probably be doing that. And Elliot, if you have a sheet that you want to email me, I can share it with others. If you guys want to work on your own recovery plan.
I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Liz, and I will forward you mine as well. I've created this little self-care plan. You will see that I have taken this to the nth degree. So don't look at me and say, wow, this guy's crazy. You can say that because it's clinically true. But, the thing that I've done is doing self-care training. I've realized how sick I was and how burned out I was. So when you take a look at mine, don't think I started there from day one of my career. I had to go way into burnout and trauma. And realizing that I was there is why I paid such attention to this. So I'm excited to see Elliot's. I'll send mine so you can look at different versions of that as well too. So I'm excited to see what Elliot's doing.
One of the things that also becomes apparent doing it this way is I'm reviewing what it is that I'm putting my clients through.
Awesome.
So the physician heal thyself, if I have a cold or if I have a flu, it's easy to prescribe for me. But if I am struggling with whatever medical issues I have, plus I am not doing very well with my recovery, how do I heal that? So if I then turn around and sit a client down and make them go through 2 hours of questions, I'm not so sure that I'm going to build a decent rapport between two people in recovery, which is what my specialization is, and B, I'm probably going to turn the client off. So exposing myself to my own questions and coming up with helpful answers to those questions helps look at my process professionally as well as in recovery.
Awesome.
Do you guys have other thoughts about either stuff that Matt talked about or otherwise in terms of thinking about how we as leaders can be impactful, hopefully positively on the well-being of, those around us during this time? or examples of people who have been doing a good job for you?
I wanted just to comment on, I think my department, I've been real happy. The main UF has put together a great resource list I shared on the chat. But I find like my work is so different from everyone else's that you had mentioned earlier, like when you reach out for supervision or mentoring and stuff, it's hard to find that often. Because it is pretty rare what we do. So I'm really thankful for this connectivity, but I wonder, as a leader trying to connect people, also in part you have to have made a lot more connections yourself too. And so I guess just like, I think the meetings are helpful for networking like that, but I wonder what other tools we can have for those kind of connections.
You mean tools like through the Street Medicine Institute beyond just the symposia? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Sure, yeah. Or if there are even other organizations like, the National Healthcare for Homeless and, other things people recommend that you might already be part of that I don't even know about.
Yeah, and I would just reinforce is that, that there's, because we hit this in my experience in mental health is, especially for those like in private practice, we know, and there's some data to back this up, is that we stay healthier if we have that group. And again, we structure that in a way where we're providing support to each other. We also seek out, as part of our licensing process, and the smart people continue this forward after that, is, we're required to get that individual supervision. A lot of people think that's just for professional development. It's also for that social, emotional support as well. So I would challenge you, be creative with it. I think the question in the group is one to kind of sit with is, hey, what if 5 of us really are kind of in that nobody really gets street medicine except I'm kind of going out there on my own, or 1 or 2 of us is. How do we maybe support each other? And I just think to have just a place to talk about the work and get support around it can take us a long, long way. That coupled with our own self-care plan, because if we hold each other accountable to say, hey, Matt, you're really sounding like you might benefit from your own mental health therapy at this point. I need that from my peers because I can go a long way down into bad spaces before I kind of realize that need. So I think that that's a great thing. And maybe to reach out to people that don't have that support and create your own group could be a really beneficial thing to all of us. Again, we're not doing this because we're weak. We're doing this because we want to provide better services and keep ourselves healthy.
Nice. I had a question for the group. Hi, I'm Bonnie Irvin, social worker in Phoenix, Arizona, joining you. I'm a preceptor for social work students on a student-driven community health initiative. Our outreach arm is Street Medicine runs. Anyway, this has been really helpful to think about. And I'm thinking that maybe we should shore up our onboarding a little bit by creating maybe a single sheet that has the signs for students and preceptors to look for burnout. And then maybe at the bottom, they could have 2 sentences they add, what are their self-care, not a full plan necessarily, which would take longer, but just to get them thinking about it and have that as part of a mandatory onboarding piece. We already have kind of a long onboarding process, but I'm just wondering, does anyone have like a module, self-care module already created or something along those lines I could maybe implement easily? Certainly can develop one, but just curious if something exists. And thank you everybody for all this.
Bonnie, I think, well, Jay was about to say something. So maybe Jay has some ideas. I don't even know that I see that happening. And so I wonder if maybe not a lot of us have really thought about that too. And I'll let Jay comment in a minute, but I also think that, thus far in our conversation here, we've talked a lot about self-care. And I think for those of you who weren't on the call that we did 2 weeks ago, kind of our intro to the thinking about the psychological impact of the pandemic and the and building resilience, that Nick McGuire talked about resilience not being solely related to an individual and not being solely related to their environment, but a combination of the two. And that when we are only focused on, or a lot of organizations focus on the individual and the individual engaging in self-care, if we don't have that component of the organization and the community, or even, the street medicine team, creating an environment in which everybody is working towards caring for each other in a way that enables us to take care of ourselves too. Unless we have both of those pieces, it makes it really hard to be as resilient as we could be. Not to take away the importance of, what we've been talking about in terms of like having self-care plans and whatnot, but just also to remember, like, one of the reasons that we're having this conversation today is that it's not solely up to the individual to take care of themselves. Sorry, Jay, go.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, I think what you're saying about creating an environment and really a culture that supports us is super important. And, we talk about, from the UK, psychologically informed environments and how that connects to supporting people in terms of dealing with trauma. And I think the other piece I wanted to say is I think of it a lot as a group process as well. So while I wouldn't have a module for self-care, what we do regularly is staff check in and talk about, in these smaller groups, kind of how they're doing, what are some of the things they do toward managing the stress of the job and self-care. And there's a lot of that cross-fertilization of getting ideas from one another. So I just wanted to stress, one, creating a culture that's sort of open and concerned about that the leadership puts forward. Things like it's okay to have a mental health day off, for instance, or to take a break when you need it. Or if you see a staff member coming in and they're sick and they're still coming in, or they're very anxious that day, it's okay to build in these types of self-care breaks. We encourage it. We want that in terms of how we treat our employees. And then the other thing is really thinking about, when I talk about reflective practice, setting up kind of an environment around that, realizing that if you're going to do group work around that, there has to be trust between the staff and the management. If you're doing supervision, it works better if it's more like a co-vision as opposed to a supervision. It's really about coming together authentically, two people, and just figuring out this puzzle of how we move forward on our journey and our mission towards serving folks and helping people to heal. And that starts with ourselves, of course, and being centered. But it really needs to be that supervision is something which I would call co-vision that staff look forward to. If it's something that they're going in and they're feeling like, well, we're being called on the carpet again, or we're doing something wrong, well, then, that's going to do the opposite of what we wanted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Bonnie, just to add just a little piece of that, because, I think Liz and Jay did a great job, is, I think, and I've been working with, I find that social work schools are a little bit more open to this than a lot of the medical schools that I've worked with. But it's like, I'm really challenging social work, whether you're undergrad or graduate, before they go out into the work environment for those internships, those placements, they better have a self-care plan. And I really say, I'm starting to ask schools is, hey, you're number 3 on the list, social workers. Is it ethical to send a social worker out into an environment that we know will hurt them psychologically without giving them the tools that they need to stay healthy? And I really see this as becoming an ethical issue. And again, I'm just trying to get people's attention to the problem. But I think we need to look at that and say, hey, talk to the schools, like, how are you supporting their mental health? Because I don't want a social worker to be burned out, because they're not going to have the capacity to do the work we need them to do out when they're sitting across from clients and patients out there on the street.
Thanks for the feedback, everybody.
Yeah. Let me, I want to be aware of the time. I'm cool to stay on a little bit longer, maybe another 10 minutes or so if anybody else wants to stay on. Totally up to you. But before the majority of you go, we've had some updates just in the last hour to my slide here. Specifically, I have the dates for our next 2 webinars now. So it's going to be Saturday, May 30th. That was not what I intended to do. At 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And that'll be on mental health first aid techniques geared towards helping us kind of recognize warning signs among our friends and our colleagues and our families, and having some kind of resources more from like a lay perspective. So again, not that we're, like Matt said, not that we're going to do therapy for our colleagues, but that, you know, give us some resources and techniques for knowing how to bring that up when you see a coworker that you're worrying about. And then Saturday, May 13th, June 13th, we're going to have Maria Fordham work with us on reflective practice, which is a lot of, I think, something that we can do, especially during this time, and even during our small groups, to really kind of think about how things are going and process through that in a way that's really meaningful. And then, so the peer support groups, that's us supporting each other, not our peer support team folks on our street medicine teams, but all of us working to support each other. So we're gonna have one every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And it's open to anyone, but I am gonna set kind of a limit because I think more than 10 people would be too many. So we'll have a sign up for that. And then we had our request for a nurse only peer group. And so this can include nurses and nurse practitioners. And anywhere, I know there are a bunch of different degrees that are incorporated in the nursing field, but so anybody who fits in that category, every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll have a sign up for that as well. If there are enough people who want to join that, and we don't have enough groups, we have other people who are willing to help lead groups on this. So even though we're going to limit the size of each group, we have more capacity than just for 2 groups. And for the one every Tuesday, I'm going to lead that one, and every other week, Nick McGuire, who was on the call, or on the call we had 2 weeks ago, he's going to join with us too. And then also there's a student group. Karen, do you want to unmute yourself and just say what that's going to be, or what that is?
Yeah, so we're going to have a student group every week after our COVID-19 update meetings. So that's going to take place around 3:30 Eastern time every
Hey, Kai, it's Michael from the street team. How are you?
Okay, I muted him, sorry.
Yeah, so every Saturday, 3:30 p.m. right after our normal COVID update meetings at 3. So any student is welcome to come. So thanks.
Alrighty. Well, like I said, if you want to stay and talk for a little bit longer, please do speak up. And those of you who need to go ahead and click off. But thanks everybody for joining today. It's just,
Thank you.
I have been really enjoying the work that I've been able to do with you guys thus far, and it's just kind of awesome to see all your faces when I don't get to see your faces very often. We've never done this before through the Street Medicine Institute, and we're always saying, it'd be so nice to connect with each other between the annual meetings. So I don't know, I've just been with this whole Zoom stuff, I've been thinking like, why weren't we doing this all along? So anyway, yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Liz,
Yeah.
it's Tamar.
Hi, Tamar.
As you know, I'm a retired surgeon. Then I went to rabbinical school and chaplaincy. Don't get impressed. But in rabbinical school, they required everybody to have a psychologist, a counselor. And this was, what we've been talking about, because you face all sorts of things, etc. We should have done that in medical school, or we should have done it as part of the surgery, although there was a whole lot of that unofficially. Also, something like that, but not a specific on a regular basis. There's a program called Critical Incident Stress Management, which is set up for emergency services personnel. And if you're interested in that, I can send you an email or talk to you privately. But there are a lot of different systems, methods out there, either for groups, like you're going to do with the nursing group, for example, or for individual people, which is what they did for me in rabbinical school. Thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks for sharing.
There's another piece that certified recovery specialists are in a unique position to offer as far as a resource, and this would be something you'd have to contact me personally. There are actually AA support groups for doctors. Did you guys know that?
Like AA as in Alcoholics Anonymous?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And the supposition being that one of the ways that we happen to one of our methods of self-care could be considered self-abuse. And so because we're affected by the traumatic nature of the things we're coping with, I think the medical profession has a tendency to like, well, I'm not going to say specifically, but can have a tendency to go in that direction. And the 12-step groups that are around are cognizant of that.
Well, and I just to supplement that, I heard a statistic yesterday from a trauma surgeon, but she was talking about physicians in general as just from suicide, we lose. Let me make sure I get this right. We lose more physicians to suicide a year than we graduate from medical school. I need to check up on that because that just blew me away. But this was a physician who specialized in physician self-care, and I just think it just puts forth the incredible problem in healthcare that we're seeing, and we need to support each other. We need to start talking about this, because one of the things that we see with burnout is we get one of the reactions to our cup being always full is we get very rigid. And I find sometimes when I try to talk to physicians about this and medical providers in general, there's almost this defensive that comes back. It's like, how dare you say I'm burned out? It's like, I'm not saying, it's just statistics. And but it's like, how do we have safe spaces to talk about this? And I think, that the fact that there is an AA or NA meeting, I just wish that would, and I support that totally. So don't say that, please hear that. But like, how do we give it to be okay for people in the medical profession to talk about this? Because I think it's like, I'm too strong to be burned out, and that's killing people right now. So I think it's like, how do we make that vulnerability okay for folks? And again, I want them to be healthy, but I also want the care to be the best it possibly can be as well. Elliot, thanks for sharing that. I think that's important research to know that's out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so much of what we do as healthcare providers, we are asked to be heroes. We definitely, I think, internalize that to some degree, that we feel like we should be heroes. And that means some sort of invincibility. And that if we show that we are vulnerable, that we're not we're not giving that portrait of the invincible superhero too. And I think, I don't know, just, I mean, reflecting on that for me, as a physician and as a mom and as a woman, and I don't know what it's like for men, so maybe that's unfair, but, you know, I feel like women especially are asked to be in that superhero position too, to not only like be amazing at her career and an amazing mom and, you know, an amazing friend and this and that, and to look great all the time or whatever, you know, like I think, and not to say that men don't experience this too, but I certainly know as a woman, I feel like that I have to be on for everyone all the time. And that's just it's a hard thing to overcome in my own mind, that it's okay for me not to be that for everybody. And it's okay. And actually it's preferable that I do show vulnerability, because it, you know, it also helps let anybody who looks up to me know that, like, hey, I'm just trying to make it too, you know, and that we shouldn't expect that of each other either, I think.
Well, and you just like from a very like outcomes based measure, and Brene Brown gave us all permission to be vulnerable. So thanks to her for that piece. But you know, it's like empathy, compassion is a very vulnerable state. So part of our connecting with patients is our own vulnerability. And I think it's a little counterintuitive, but to be vulnerable takes a lot of strength. And I think we need to embrace that piece of ourselves. Obviously, I can't speak from the woman perspective, but you know, I think the pressure on our men is, God forbid you share your emotions or you express any kind of weakness. We get kind of shot down for that as well. And I've learned over the years that people respond incredibly well, whether it's the staff I'm supervising or even patients I need to apologize for because I've screwed up somewhere along the line. We connect with human beings that way. So I think to create, you know, if you want to think about this, and Google did a great study, they saw that the teams at Google thrived when there was a high level of psychological safety within those teams. So when we're able to be supported in our vulnerability through each other, we thrive professionally as well. So I think, you know, I think these discussions are so critical, Liz, and sharing, and I appreciate what you just shared, is to say, hey, I'm struggling with this. How are other people managing this? Any suggestions out there for me? And sometimes just to say, yeah, I'm also struggling this. It might be a little bit of a different struggle, but I can relate to you. That's what we need to do with each other, because I think we're all like you said, have to be superheroes, and God forbid we share our vulnerability. And I think the more we have the courage to do that, the better we are professionally and the healthier we stay as well.
Yeah, I think, sorry, go ahead. I keep cutting you off. Yeah. Did you have
sorry. Yeah, thank you, Liz and Matt. I think that a part of what you're talking about is the idea of perfection, especially right now, trying to do everything possible to cover all your bases for your team and for the people you're trying to help. And I discovered, or just realized in my work, I work in ED in Allentown, and they have a really beautiful culture of saying thank you at the end of the shift. And it was always normal and fine, but now with more stressors, less staff, just a lot more in this process of working with patients that possibly have COVID, and especially our homeless population that comes to the ED too. There are mistakes that are happening, and still I get a thank you at the end of the shift. So, and that is just, it blew my mind, and I actually cried twice in 2 of my shifts because I made some big mistakes, but people still said thank you. And I think, as simple as it is, it just changed how I looked at my team and changed how I want to approach strife or issues in the future, because just saying, it's basically saying it's okay that you messed up, we're still grateful that you're here working with us. And like, it's just a simple word. It really helps.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
it.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing that.
Mhm.
You know, I was going to say too, I don't know if any of you were on the call 2 weeks ago when we did this sort of overview, but I showed I shared a graph or a chart of the psychological response to it was created for like natural disasters, I think, but that kind of after the event happens, there's this, and so on the horizontal axis is time, and on the vertical axis is our emotions, and so at the top is an emotional highs, and at the bottom is emotional lows, and it kind of goes through this curve of what kind of psychological responses are from people post or kind of leading up to an event and then afterwards. And one of the things that happens is that after the event happens, there is this spike of an emotional high, and it's called the hero phase, or the heroism phase, where and I think this is very true for folks in healthcare, and especially in emergency rooms throughout the world, that like a lot of people are looking to those first responders and the emergency room workers as heroes. And while yes, you guys are absolutely heroes, it also comes with a set of expectations, I think, of that perfection, that you were talking about, that makes it hard to just be human in that setting. And I had heard, I shared this a couple weeks ago too, that I had read from some news outlet that some of the healthcare workers going to the hospitals in Manhattan and in the like neighborhoods in New York, that people are kind of coming out on their balconies and clapping for them and playing music and stuff like that, and that at least one of the healthcare workers' responses was like, "I don't feel like I deserve this," and it was really hard to read, because I felt like A, you absolutely deserve it, and B, you don't deserve to have those hero expectations put on you either.
Well, and I think if we see that, like you said, as part of our job, because I think that there's a mentality of talking to a lot of medical providers over the years that, making life or death decisions, is what we're doing. Yeah, with street medicine, we're trying to keep people alive until we can hopefully get them in many ways into a better life, a safer life situation, while improving their health, which is amazing. But I think, the thing that I'm really worried about right now is that thing, but I think we're really well designed as human beings to deal with like a natural disaster where it peaks and then there's a recovery process. And even for that, it's very difficult. What I'm really trying to do, because if there's a book that has resiliency in the title, I probably read it. I'm not finding a whole lot of models to say, how do we sustain ourselves over a 2, 3, 4, 6, 18-month period of being in that state? And that's where I'm racking my brain as somebody who does a lot of self-care, leadership trainings. How do we support people in this model? And my one answer is probably taking scheduled strategic time off so we have breaks from that. But the reality is that that's very difficult to do. So I'm really worried about, let's just say it ends now. We've had, you look at 66 days is about the time we see biological changes, permanent ones due to stress. Now we can recover from that, but it takes another kind of 2 months kind of to recover. It's like, boy, this can't be our new normal where we go into it every day without some break, some respite from it. And I know that we need everybody, all hands on deck, but that gets us through a natural disaster. I don't know how it gets us through 18 months. I'm really scared of what we'll see about the heart attack rate and a lot of other medical issues that people are going to be experiencing 6 months from now. And that assumes we hit some kind of norm over the summer. So I think we all have to be innovative around self-care right now, and I don't know how much energy we have to focus on that. So I think we have a challenge of our lifetime when it comes to ourselves as well as the care we're providing. Just to say that out loud, I think is important. And give, hey, if we have to think 95% of the time on the patients we're serving, trying to take 5% on time of how do we get through this collectively in a healthy state. Because there's going to be sick people after the epidemic who are living out on the street and needing us at our best too. It's a fascinating and scary time when you look at the research on resiliency and that curve you're talking about.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to learn.
Yes, yes.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the call. The natives are getting restless in the other room, which means my 8-year-old and 6-year-old. So I'm gonna end the call. But this was really great, you all, and thank you so much for joining. And I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work you're doing. You are my hero, but don't take that as any more pressure.
Thank you very much.
For everything you do. Thanks for letting me be a small part of it.
All right. Bye, everybody.